They said the Alpha King hadn't moved in 43 days. They said the best healers in 4 kingdoms had tried and failed, that whatever curse had swallowed him whole was pulling him somewhere the living couldn't follow. They were still saying it the night my 6-year-old twins slipped past 3 locked doors, walked to his bedside, and did something nobody could explain. He didn't just wake up. He turned his head, breathed in, and said, with the certainty of a man who had been waiting, "I know this scent. I know these children." What he didn't say, what he had no way of knowing yet, was that recognizing them meant recognizing me, and that recognizing me was going to unravel everything both of us had spent years trying to bury. Chapter 1. 43 days of nothing. Then my children walked in. The rule in the palace was simple. You did not go near the east corridor after nightfall. You did not linger near the sealed double doors at the end of it. You did not ask questions about the room behind those doors, about the man lying still inside it, about the healers who rotated in and out every 6 hours with quieter faces each time. You kept your head down. You did your work. You went home. I had followed that rule for 3 years without difficulty. I was a laundress. I washed the royal linens, pressed the chamber curtains, and folded the king's bedsheets with the same careful hands every week. I was nobody. I had worked very hard to be nobody. Tonight I had broken the first rule before my shift even started, because I had brought my children. Kale and Ren were 6. They knew how to be quiet when it mattered. I had taught them that before I taught them anything else. They knew how to make themselves small, how to stay where they were put, how to look at the floor when adults passed. I had stationed them on the bench outside the linen room with a bread roll each and strict instructions. Do not move. Do not speak to anyone. Do not touch anything. I had been gone 11 minutes. When I came back, the bench was empty. I stood there holding a stack of pressed pillowcases and felt the particular cold that only a mother knows. The cold that starts in the chest and moves outward until your fingers go numb. I set the pillowcases down. I counted my breaths the way my mother had taught me. 4 in, 7 out. Steady. Then I heard Ren's voice drifting from the east corridor. "He's not sleeping, Kale. Sleeping people don't smell like that." I moved fast and silent, the way I had learned to move in the years before the palace, before the laundry shifts and the carefully constructed nobody life. The east corridor was dim, the wall sconces burned low at this hour, and the sealed double doors at the end were, my stomach dropped, open. Not broken, not forced. Standing slightly ajar, as though someone had simply turned the handle. I pushed through. The king's chamber was vast. High ceilings, dark stone, candles burning in iron holders along the walls. The bed dominated the far end, enormous, curtained in deep charcoal blue, and there, impossibly, were my children. Kale stood at the foot of the bed with his arms crossed, and his small face set in the expression he wore when he was trying very hard to manage a situation that had already escaped him. He was the cautious one, the one who thought before he moved. Ren had climbed onto the footstool beside the bed. She had her hand pressed flat against the king's chest. Not his hand, not his arm, his chest, over his heart. Her small palm against the linen of his sleeping shirt, her eyes closed, her brow slightly furrowed in the way it was when she was concentrating very hard on something only she could feel. "Ren?" My voice came out barely above a breath. "Kale, come here, right now." Kale turned immediately, relief flooding his face. Ren didn't move. "Mama." Her voice was soft, distant, the way it got when she was deep in something. "He's so lonely. It's the loudest thing I've ever felt from anyone. Louder than anything. Ren, we need to... I'm just giving him something. Just a little something so he knows someone's here." "You don't touch people without asking. He can't ask, Mama. He's been alone in there for a very long time." I crossed the room in 6 steps and put my hand on her shoulder. The moment I touched her, I felt it too. A faint echo of what she was channeling, the particular resonance that happened when Ren's gift was fully open. It moved through her small body like a current and brushed the edges of my awareness, and what I felt was darkness. Vast and cold and endless, and somewhere inside it, something that had not yet given up. The king's chest rose, deeper than it had in 43 days. I knew this because I had washed the observations from the healer's notes into the back of my memory, the way I catalogued everything, involuntarily, the curse of a scent reader's mind. Shallow, the notes always said, breaths growing shallower. This one was not shallow. His head turned on the pillow. Kale made a small, tight sound. I grabbed Ren's wrist to pull her back, but before I could move, the king's nostrils flared. Slowly, deliberately, like a man catching something on the wind. His lips moved. I leaned forward without meaning to. "I know this," he said. His voice was wrecked, barely more than a rasp, the voice of someone who had not spoken in 43 days, but the words were clear. "I know this smell." His hand rose from the coverlet. He did not reach toward Ren, who was closest. He did not reach toward Kale at the foot of the bed. He reached toward me. I stopped breathing. His eyes were still closed. He had no way of knowing where I was standing, but his hand lifted and turned with the slow, certain movement of something following a compass, and it pointed, directly, unmistakably, at my face. "You," he said, "you've been here. Every night. You've been—" His voice broke on something that might have been a breath, or might have been a sound too complicated to name. "I thought I was dreaming you." Then the door crashed open behind us. Healers flooded in, guards behind them. Someone shouted for water, someone else shouted for the royal physician, someone was already reaching for Ren, and I pulled her off the footstool and into my arms before the hand could close around her. I pressed her against my chest and grabbed Kale's collar and hauled him close. The room became chaos. In the center of it, on the bed, the Alpha King Kalen Reed lay with his eyes still closed and his hand still raised and a single line carved between his brows. Not pain, not confusion, but the expression of a man solving something, working something out. The head healer, a silver-haired woman named Pauline, reached him first. She pressed 2 fingers to his pulse point and made a sound I had never heard from her before in 3 years of palace work. A sound like relief so large it had nowhere to go. "His pulse," she said, to no one, to everyone. "His pulse is—" She pressed harder, as though she didn't trust it. "Someone send for Lord Holman. Now, go." The room erupted again. I used the chaos the way I always used chaos, to become invisible. I pulled the twins toward the wall, then toward the door, calculating the fastest path out of this room, down the corridor, back to the linen storage where I could claim I had never been here, had heard nothing, knew nothing. Kale's hand found mine. "Mama." His voice was very small and very serious. When I was standing at the foot of the bed, I put my hands on the frame, the way I do. The way he did, pressing his palms to surfaces, reading the emotional residue left behind by everyone who had ever touched them. "Mama, someone cursed him on purpose. I felt them. They've been inside this palace a long time." He paused. "And they're still here." I looked down at my son's serious dark eyes. Then I looked back at the bed, where Pauline was speaking rapidly to the king, where his hand had finally lowered back to the coverlet, where the room was full of people who would have questions tomorrow that I could not afford to answer. I picked Kale up. I held Ren tighter. We did not make it to the door. "You." The voice cut through the noise like a blade, quiet but carrying. I turned. Lord Dave Holman stood in the doorway. The king's senior advisor was a tall man, lean through the shoulders, with the stillness of someone who had held a kingdom together through crisis before and knew exactly how to walk into a room that was falling apart. His eyes found me immediately. Not the healers, not the guards, me. "You're one of the laundresses," he said, not a question. "Yes, my lord." "And those are your children?" "Yes, my lord, I'm sorry. They wandered. I was trying to—" "They walked through a triple-locked door," Holman said, "that has not opened once in 43 days. He looked at the twins with an expression I could not read, then back at me. "What are their names?" I held them tighter. "Kale," I said, "and Ren." Holman was quiet for a moment. Behind him, Pauline was saying something urgent that I couldn't make out over the blood rushing in my ears. "You'll be given rooms in the palace tonight," Holman said. "You and the children. For your own safety and for questioning tomorrow." His tone left no room for argument. "I'll have someone show you up." I nodded. I performed gratitude with my face, but as he turned away, Wren pressed her mouth to my ear. "Mama," she whispered, "that man has something that doesn't belong to him. I can feel it when he looks at us. Something he's been holding a long time." She paused. "It feels like it should belong to you." Chapter 2. What it costs to be nobody on purpose. The rooms they gave us were on the 3rd floor of the East Wing. Wren cataloged everything the moment we walked in: the wardrobe with its brass handles, the wash basin with soap that smelled like lavender instead of the lye block we used at home, the window with its view of the inner courtyard where torches burned in iron brackets along the garden walls. She pressed her nose to the glass and fogged it with her breath and said, "It smells safe here, Mama," with the simple certainty of a child reporting the weather. Cale sat on the edge of the bed and said nothing. He was doing the thing he did after he'd read something heavy, holding himself still, letting the residue settle. I had learned not to push him when he was like this. It came out when it was ready. I checked the door. 1 lock, on the inside. Good. I checked the window. 3rd floor, 15 feet to the courtyard stones below. Not good, but survivable if it came to that. I noted the drain pipe running along the outer wall 3 feet to the left. Better. I had been calculating exits since before the twins could walk. It was not something I thought about consciously anymore. It was just something my eyes did when I entered a room. "Mama." Wren had turned from the window. "You're doing the checking thing." "I'm just looking." "You always say that." "Then you already knew the answer." She considered this, accepted it, and climbed onto the bed beside her brother. Cale leaned into her automatically, the way they always gravitated toward each other in uncertain spaces, 2 halves of something that thought better together. I sat in the chair by the window and tried to think. 3 years. I had kept us invisible for 3 years in this palace, which was itself the tail end of 6 years of running, hiding, and rebuilding after I had fled the eastern provinces with 2 newborns strapped to my chest and my mother's last gift, a small leather satchel of suppressant tonic pressed into my hands at a crossroads in the dark. My mother had pressed her forehead to mine and said, "Keep them quiet and keep them moving, and don't stop until you're somewhere nobody knows your real name." She was gone a week later. I told people she died of a fever. That was easier than the truth, which was that I was fairly certain she had been found by the man I was running from, and that the fever story was something she would have wanted me to say, because she had always been practical about the kind of things that broke your heart. I had arrived at the royal palace of the Northern Reach with false papers, a new name, and 2 6-month-old infants who were already showing signs of abilities that would get us killed if anyone with the wrong intentions saw them. Cale had started at 4 months, pressing his small palms to the floor of whatever room we were in and going very still, his eyes unfocused, reading the emotional history of every person who had ever stood there. He couldn't explain it then. He could barely speak. But I could see it happening, the way his face moved through expressions that were not his own. Wren came into her gift at 5 months. She cried less than most babies, not because she was easy, but because when she was distressed, she pushed the feeling outward, and whatever was near her, me, her brother, once a cart horse that had been stamping and frothing in the market street, went calm. The horse had stopped mid-stamp and stood blinking in the road like it had forgotten what it was upset about. I understood then what I was carrying. Scent weavers were spoken of in the old texts, the way people speak of things they're not sure ever really existed. A bloodline gift, passed matrilineally, surfacing in 1 child per generation at most. My mother had it, her mother before her, the ability to encode living memory into scent, to press a feeling, a voice, an image so precise it played like a waking dream directly into the mind of whoever breathed it in. I had used mine carefully and almost never. In this palace, I used it only once a week, folding a faint calm into the king's bedsheets, not because anyone asked me to, but because I had learned in my first month here that the sheets went directly to the king's chamber, And something in me, the part that couldn't turn its gift off even when it tried, encoded a quiet steadiness into the fabric every time my hands pressed the linen flat. It was involuntary, like humming. I hadn't realized I was doing it until the third week, and by then it was habit. I had never imagined he was breathing it. I had never imagined it was keeping him tethered to something. "Mama." Cale's voice came from the bed, quiet and deliberate. He was ready. The thing I felt in the bed frame. I looked at him. "It was old," he said. "The curse. Whoever made it planned it for a long time. It's not like when someone loses their temper and breaks something by accident. It's like he searched for the right shape of it. Like when you're very cold for a very long time and it gets into the stone of a room. That kind of old." He pressed his lips together. "And there were two people's hands on it. The frame. The curse came from two people working together." I kept my face still. "Two people," I said. "One of them has been in that room recently. The residue was still warm." He looked at his hands, then up at me. "And Mama, one of them smelled like nothing. You know how some people smell like nothing?" I knew. A scent stripper. Someone who could chemically neutralize their own trail. The rarest and most dangerous kind of practitioner, because they were invisible to every gift that relied on scent to read a person's history or intention. I had met exactly one in my life. I kept my face still. "Okay," I said. "You did very well, both of you." I stood and moved to the bed, pulling the coverlet back. "Now sleep. Tomorrow I'll figure out how to get us out of here." "Are we in trouble?" Ren asked. "Not yet." "Is the king going to be all right?" I thought about his hand, rising from the bed, reaching toward me with the slow certainty of a compass finding north. "I think so," I said. I tucked them in. I sang the 4-note lullaby, the one I had pressed into a scent memory when they were 3 days old, when I wasn't sure we would survive the first winter, when I had encoded every good thing I could imagine their life becoming and folded it into a fragrance I released in the room while they slept. I had done it so they would carry it with them, so that wherever they went, some part of them would remember that once, someone had imagined the very best for them. They were asleep in minutes. I went back to the chair by the window and sat with my knees drawn up and my eyes on the courtyard below, watching the torchlight move in the wind. I was still sitting there 2 hours later when the soft knock came at the door. I was on my feet before the second knock landed. "Who is it?" "Holman." A pause. "I have tea, and I'd like to speak with you before tomorrow's formal questioning, if you're willing." I looked at the sleeping twins. I looked at the door. I opened it. Dave Holman stood in the corridor with a small tray, 2 cups, a pot, no guards. He was still dressed, which told me he had not slept. His face in the corridor's dim light was the face of a man who had been managing a catastrophe alone for a long time and had just watched something shift that he didn't yet know how to categorize. "May I come in?" I stepped back. He entered, set the tray on the small table by the window, and poured without asking how I took it. I noticed that people who poured without asking were either very comfortable with authority or very practiced at putting people at ease. Sometimes both. "You've worked in the palace 3 years, he said, settling into the second chair. "Yes, my lord." "Laundry. You've never requested reassignment, never caused difficulty, never drawn attention." "No, my lord." He looked at me over his cup. "And tonight, your children walked through 3 locked doors, and the king's chest rose for the first time in 43 days. I said nothing. "I'm not accusing you of anything," he said. "I want to be clear about that. Whatever your children did, the result was remarkable." He set his cup down. "His pulse is stronger tonight than it's been since the curse took hold. Pauline believes he'll be fully conscious within the day." I let myself feel 1 second of relief, then I put it away. "I'm glad," I said, carefully. Holman studied me the way a man studies something he is trying to identify by its outline in poor light. "You're frightened," he said. "I'm a servant who is being questioned by the king's senior advisor at midnight, my lord. It would be strange not to be." A faint smile, gone quickly. "Fair." He stood, smoothing his coat. "I'll let you sleep. The formal questioning will be mid-morning, after the king has had time to stabilize." He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. "Your children are remarkable, Nara. Whatever gifts they carry, and I suspect you know exactly what gifts those are, they use them tonight to pull a man back from somewhere the rest of us couldn't reach." He looked at me directly. "That's worth protecting." He left. I stood in the center of the room and read the air where he had been. My gift was not something I could turn off. Scent carried truth the way words never quite could, and every person left a trail of it whether they knew it or not. Holman's trail was complex, genuine care layered over something older, a low note I couldn't place, like the smell of a room where a fire had been put out a long time ago. Not dangerous, but not entirely clean either. I filed it away. I went back to the chair. I did not sleep. Chapter 3. He recognized their scent, and then he said mine. Kalen Reed opened his eyes at 7:30 in the morning. I knew the exact moment it happened because the corridor outside our room erupted, running feet, voices pitched high with something between shock and relief, someone calling for Pauline, someone else calling for Holman. Wren sat up in bed with her eyes already wide, reading the emotional weather of the palace the way she always did before she was fully awake. "He's awake," she said, simply, as if reporting sunrise. Kale was already pulling on his boots. "No," I said. They both looked at me. "We stay here. We wait. We do not go anywhere near that room." Kale opened his mouth. "No," I said again, quietly, finally. He closed his mouth. He understood the tone. We had a system, the three of us. There were discussions and there were decisions, and the difference between them lived entirely in how still my face went when I spoke. This was a decision. We ate the breakfast that arrived on a tray. Bread, soft cheese, a pot of something warm and sweet that Wren decided was the best thing she had ever tasted, and Kale ate methodically without commenting on. I watched the door. I listened to the corridor settle from chaos into the particular busy hum of a palace reorienting itself around a changed fact. The king was awake. 43 days, and now he was awake. I told myself it had nothing to do with me. I told myself the twins had simply been the last in a long line of attempts, the straw that broke the curse's hold, coincidence and timing and nothing more. I told myself the hand rising from the bed had been involuntary muscle movement. I told myself he had not said, "I know this smell," with the certainty of a man reading a compass. I was still telling myself these things when Holman's assistant knocked at our door at 9:30 and said the king was asking to see the children. The children, not me. I dressed Kale and Wren in the cleanest things we had, which was not saying much, but I smoothed every wrinkle I could find and made them both wash their faces twice. Wren complained, Kale submitted. I braided Wren's hair back from her face with the particular tightness that meant, "Stay tidy and do not embarrass us," and she accepted this without argument, which told me she understood the stakes better than she was letting on. Holman's assistant led us down 2 corridors and through a smaller door than I expected, not the grand entrance to the king's chamber, but a side passage that opened into a sitting room attached to it. The room was bright with morning light, simply furnished, a fire going in the grate. It smelled of wood smoke and the particular astringent herb the healers burned to clear infection from the air. And underneath that, something else. Something warm and complex that my gift caught before my conscious mind could stop it. Like a deep forest after rain. Like something ancient and unbothered by weather. I pulled my gift back, firmly. Pauline was there, standing near the window with her arms folded, and the expression of a woman who had already argued against this meeting and lost. 2 guards stood near the inner door. Holman was to the left of the fireplace, and through the inner door, sitting up in the large bed with a blanket across his lap and a cup of something steaming in his hands, was Kalen Reed. I had seen the king before, at a distance, before the curse, in the way palace staff sees royalty, a shape moving through a space that briefly occupied the same air as you before passing on. I had thought him severe. The sharp jaw, the dark hair, the particular stillness of someone accustomed to rooms going quiet when he entered. He was still severe. 43 days of a curse had carved him leaner, left shadows under his eyes, and a gauntness along his cheekbones that hadn't been there before. But his eyes, when they moved to the doorway and found us, were clear. Sharply, immediately clear. The eyes of someone who had been unconscious for 6 weeks and woken up still knowing exactly who he was. They found the twins first. He went completely still. Not startled, not confused. The stillness of recognition. A man seeing something he expected, but had not quite dared to believe would actually be there. "Come in," he said. His voice was rough at the edges from disuse, but steady underneath. He looked at Kale, then at Ren, with the particular focused attention of someone cataloging something important. "Both of you. It's all right." Ren went without hesitation. This did not surprise me. Ren had never met a person she was afraid to walk toward. Kale followed, slower, reading the room with every step. I could tell by the slight lag in his movement, the way his eyes tracked slightly downward as he walked, feeling the emotional residue in the floor. I stayed in the doorway. Kalen looked at Ren for a long moment. Then he said, quietly and with complete certainty, "You push feeling outward." Ren's eyes went wide. "How did you know that?" "Because last night something reached me in the dark. Something that felt like..." He paused, choosing the word carefully. "Like a hand. Like someone putting their hand in mine and refusing to let go." He looked at her small face. "That was you." Ren nodded slowly. "You were so alone in there." Something moved across his face. Gone quickly, but I caught it. The expression of a man hit somewhere he hadn't braced for. "Yes," he said. "I was." He shifted his gaze to Kale. "And you read emotional residue through contact." Kale's chin lifted slightly. He was deciding whether to be impressed or suspicious that this stranger knew. He landed on cautious. "Yes." "What did you feel in my bed frame?" The room went very quiet. Pauline's head turned sharply. Holman straightened. Kale looked at me. I gave him the smallest nod. "A curse," he said. "An old one, made by 2 people together. One of them has been inside this palace recently." He paused. "One of them smells like nothing." Kalen's jaw tightened. He set his cup down slowly. "You're certain? 2 people?" "Yes." Something passed between Kalen and Holman. Fast, weighted. The communication of 2 people who had worked together long enough to have a shorthand. Holman's expression shifted in a way I filed away without understanding yet. Then Kalen looked past the twins. He looked at me. I had been standing in the doorway trying to be the wall, trying to be furniture, trying to be the nobody I had spent 3 years constructing with such care. He looked at me the way you look at something you have been trying to remember the shape of for a very long time. "You've been washing my sheets," he said. My chest went very tight. "Yes, Your Majesty, it's my assignment." "For how long?" 3 years." He was quiet for a moment. The fire crackled. Outside in the corridor, someone walked past quickly and was gone. "I have been breathing your memory into my lungs every night for 3 years," he said. Not an accusation, not a declaration. The careful, precise statement of a man reporting something factual that happened to be extraordinary. Scent weaving doesn't transfer passively unless the weaver puts something into the fabric deliberately. His eyes stayed on mine. "What did you put in?" The room was very quiet. I could feel Pauline looking at me, Holman looking at me, the twins looking at me with the particular attention of children watching their parent navigate something they don't fully understand, but know is important. "Calm," I said. It came out steadier than I felt. "I encode a calm into the fabric when I press the sheets. It's involuntary. I don't always realize I'm doing it." "And underneath the calm?" I said nothing. "There is always a bass note," he said. "Scent weavers can't help it. The calm sits on top of something. The something is the truth." He leaned forward slightly and I caught it again. That warm, deep scent underneath the herbs and wood smoke. The forest after rain thing that my gift wanted to read and that I kept pulling it back from. "What is the bass note, Nara?" My name in his mouth was a different shape than I expected, like he had been practicing the weight of it. How do you know my name? I said. Because it's in the linen. Simply, factually. Not the word, the feeling of it. The feeling of a name you don't let yourself use anymore. I've been breathing that particular grief for 3 years, and I know its shape better than I know my own. He held my gaze. What is the bass note? I looked at my children. Ren was watching me with her head tilted, the way she watched things she was trying to understand. Kale had his arms crossed and his face set in the serious expression that meant he was already 3 steps ahead of this conversation and was waiting to see if I would catch up. I looked back at Kalen Reed, sitting lean and sharp-eyed in his sickbed, asking me a question I had not answered honestly in 6 years. Hope, I said. The bass note is hope. I encode it without meaning to. It's what's underneath everything I weave. I paused. I haven't decided yet whether that embarrasses me. He looked at me for a long moment. It shouldn't, he said quietly. It kept me alive. The silence that followed was the kind that changes the air pressure of a room. Pauline cleared her throat. Your Majesty needs to rest. One moment. He didn't look away from me. I'd like you to stay in the palace. Not as a servant, as a guest. I have questions I'm not well enough to ask today and answers I'm not well enough to give. But I would like the chance. He paused. I'm asking, not ordering. I looked at my children. Ren gave me the smallest nod, so slight no one else would have caught it. Kale was looking at the floor beneath the king's bed. His face had gone the careful blank it went when he had just read something he was still processing. 3 days, I said. We'll stay 3 days. Kalen nodded once. The relief in his eyes was there and gone quickly, but I was a scent reader, and relief had a smell, clean and slightly sweet, like the moment after rain stops, and the room was full of it. We were ushered out. In the corridor, Ren took my hand and swung it once. Kale waited until we were around the corner, and then he stopped walking. Mama. I looked down at him. The floor under his bed. His voice was very careful. There was a second layer in the residue. Old, much older than the curse. Someone encoded something into the room a long time ago, before the king was ever sick. He looked up at me. His dark eyes were very serious. Mama, it has your scent in it. Not your weaving, your actual scent. He paused. How does a room in this palace have your scent from before you were ever here? I stood in the corridor with my children, and the question neither of us could answer. And somewhere behind us, through 2 closed doors, I heard Kalen say something to Holman in a low, urgent voice, too muffled to make out the words. But the tone was the tone of a man who had just found the beginning of something he had been looking for without knowing what it was called. Chapter 4. What the Linens Told Him. Holman came for me alone that afternoon. Not the twins, just me. A young palace attendant arrived at our door and said the children were invited to spend the afternoon in the East Garden with 2 of the younger kitchen staff who had apparently volunteered to supervise them. Ren accepted this immediately, already pulling on her coat. Kale looked at me for confirmation. I crouched down to his level. Stay in the garden, I said quietly. Don't read anyone unless you have to. Don't let Ren push feeling at anyone without permission. I held his gaze. And if anything feels wrong, not uncomfortable, not strange, but wrong, you come inside immediately. You understand the difference. He nodded. He did understand the difference. I had taught it to him at age 4, the same way my mother had taught me, that discomfort was life, and strangeness was interesting, but wrong had a particular cold weight to it that sat differently in the chest. He had never once misidentified it. I watched them cross the courtyard from the window before I followed the attendant. Holman met me not in a formal room, but in a small study 2 doors down from the king's chamber. Bookshelves floor to ceiling, a desk buried under maps and correspondence, 2 chairs angled toward a cold fireplace. He gestured to one chair and took the other, and did not offer tea this time, which told me this was a different kind of conversation than last night. The king would like to speak with you privately this evening, he said. Before that, I'd like to speak with you myself. All right? He looked at me with the careful, measuring attention I was beginning to understand was simply how he inhabited a room. How much do you know about scent weavers? Enough. Humor me. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and told him what I knew, what my mother had told me, what I had pieced together myself in the years of hiding. That scent weavers were extraordinarily rare, born perhaps once per generation in a matrilineal line. That the gift encoded living memory into fragrance, not metaphorically, but literally, a full sensory experience transferred directly through breath. That a skilled weaver could leave a message so precise, so layered with emotional truth, that the recipient experienced it like a waking dream. That you could not lie in a scent weave. The gift stripped deception out of the process the way a filter strips sediment from water. Whatever you encoded was true, whether you meant to reveal it or not. Holman listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "The king has been aware of scent weavers since he was a boy. His grandmother was a scent archivist, not a weaver herself, but a scholar of the gift. She spent 40 years documenting bloodlines, abilities, the history of what weavers had done and what had been done to them." He paused. "She is the reason he recognized what you are the moment he breathed the residue in the room. He recognized it through a curse. The curse suppressed almost everything, his motor function, his consciousness, his ability to communicate. But scent perception in a bonded alpha operates below the level of conscious thought. It's physiological before it's cognitive." Holman's voice was precise, academic, the voice of a man reciting something he had studied. He couldn't move, he couldn't speak, but he could breathe. And every night for 3 years he breathed what you put into those linens. I looked at the cold fireplace. "What did he tell you?" I said. "About what he experienced?" Holman was quiet for a moment. He said it was like being underwater in the dark, completely alone, completely unable to move toward the surface, and every night something reached him, not enough to pull him up, but enough to keep him from sinking further. He looked at me steadily. He said it smelled like someone who had lost a great deal and was still, somehow, choosing to believe in something. He said it was the most honest thing he had ever breathed. I said nothing. He also said, Holman continued, more carefully now, that underneath the calm and the hope there was something else, a specific grief, the grief of a name not used, a life set aside. He paused. He said it smelled like someone who had been waiting for something to be over for so long that they had stopped thinking of it as waiting and started thinking of it as just existing. The fire was cold, but I felt very warm. He had no right to know all that, I said. No, Holman agreed. He didn't. He knows that. A beat. He wanted me to tell you that before you went in, that he knows he has held knowledge of you that you didn't choose to give him, and that he understands if that makes this conversation difficult. I looked at Holman's face and read his scent without meaning to, the same complex layering from last night, the genuine care on top, the low note beneath it that I still couldn't fully place. Not dangerous, but something old and unresolved sitting in it like a stone at the bottom of a clear river, visible but unmoved. "What aren't you telling me?" I said. His eyes sharpened slightly. "I'm sorry?" "Your scent. There's something underneath it, something you've been carrying a long time." I held his gaze. "I'm not accusing you of anything, but I am telling you I can read it, and it has the particular weight of something you haven't decided yet whether to say." A long pause. "You're more skilled than I expected," he said quietly. "My mother was better." He nodded slowly. Then he stood. "The king will see you at 6. The twins are welcome to eat in the kitchen with the staff tonight. They'll be well looked after." He moved toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame. Exactly as he had last night. I was beginning to think this was where he did his thinking. In doorways, on the threshold between rooms, in the space where leaving and staying were still both possible. "There is something," he said, without turning, "that I haven't told anyone, including the king." A pause that had weight to it. "I'm not yet certain it's mine to tell, but I'm becoming less certain I have the right to keep it." He left without explaining further. I sat in the chair for a long time after he was gone. Kalen was dressed when I arrived at 6, not formally, but properly. Dark clothes, simply cut, his hair pulled back from his face. He looked less like a man who had been unconscious for 43 days, and more like a man who had decided he was done being unconscious and was moving forward on that decision through sheer will. He was standing at the window when I entered. He turned when he heard the door. "Sit wherever you're comfortable," he said. I chose the chair farthest from the bed and closest to the door. He noticed. He didn't comment. He sat in the chair across from me, and there was a small table between us with a lamp burning low on it, and in that warm, unsteady light, I could see his face clearly for the first time without a crowd of healers and guards between us. He was younger than I had thought, or had been before the curse. The 43 days had aged something around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I want to tell you what I know," he said, "and then I want to ask you something, and you don't have to answer if you're not ready." "All right." "Your base note is hope," he said, "but that's not all I know. I know you check every exit when you enter a room because the grief in your weaving has the particular pattern of someone who has needed exits urgently before. I know you love your children with something that goes beyond ordinary love. It has the quality of a decision made under pressure and kept every day since. I know you hum 4 notes when you work, and you don't realize you're doing it." He held my gaze steadily. "I know you are hiding from something, and I know whatever you're hiding from has a scent you never encoded directly, but its absence is in everything you weave, the way a missing tooth changes the shape of a smile." The lamp flickered between us. "You had no right to know any of that," I said. "No, I didn't." No apology in his voice, just acknowledgement, clean and direct. "I'm not telling you because I think I earned it. I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know what I know before this conversation goes any further. You shouldn't be walking into a room where someone already holds your history without knowing they hold it." I looked at him. "That's unexpectedly decent of you," I said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, the shape a smile leaves behind when it doesn't fully surface. "Don't sound so surprised." "I'm not surprised. I'm recalibrating." This time it did reach his eyes, brief and real and gone quickly, but there. "The thing I want to ask you," he said, returning to the careful tone, "your children's abilities. The boy reads emotional residue. The girl projects feeling outward. Those are not random gifts. They are specific, paired, and extraordinarily rare." He leaned forward slightly. "Kale told me this morning that the floor under my bed carries a scent in its residue that belongs to you, from before you were ever in this palace." He held my gaze. "I think I know what that means, but I would rather hear it from you." The lamp burned between us. I made a decision. Not because I trusted him fully. Trust was something I had learned to rebuild slowly, in small pieces, the way you rebuild a wall after it has been knocked down. You did not hand someone all the stones at once, but I gave him one stone. "There are people," I said, "who hunt scent weavers and their children, who seek out the bloodline specifically for what can be extracted from it. I have been running from one of them for 6 years. I paused. "His name is Davin, and the reason Kale smelled my scent in the residue of a room I have never entered, I don't know yet, but I think you do." Kalen was very still. "Not completely," he said, "but I'm beginning to." He stood and moved to the window, his back to me for a moment, looking out at the courtyard where the torches burned. "My grandmother left me archives. I haven't read all of them. There are sections coded, requiring a specific scent key to open, which she apparently expected me to encounter naturally if the time was right." He turned back. "I think you might be the key, Nara. I think she expected you to come here." The cold moved through me slowly. "Your grandmother is dead," I said. "Yes, 7 years ago." "Then she prepared something 7 years ago that she expected would eventually reach me." I held his gaze. "That means she knew about me before I knew about her, before I ran, before the twins were born." "Yes," he said quietly. "I think that's exactly what it means." Outside in the corridor, footsteps passed and faded. The lamp burned. I thought about Holman in the doorway, carrying something he hadn't decided yet whether to say. I thought about Kale's face when he read the floor. I thought about Ren pressing her small hand to a dying man's chest and pushing the one feeling she had, "You are not alone. Someone is here," into the dark with everything she had. I thought about my mother at a crossroads in the dark, pressing a satchel into my hands, her forehead against mine. "Don't stop until you're somewhere nobody knows your real name." I was somewhere nobody knew my real name, and somehow, impossibly, the room already had my scent in it. Chapter 5. The Scent of Someone Pretending to Be Gone. 3 things happened the following morning in quick succession, and it was the order of them that mattered. First, Cale woke before dawn and lay very still in the bed with his eyes open and his hands flat against the mattress, reading the emotional residue of everyone who had slept in the room before us. I knew he was doing it because his breathing went shallow and his face cycled through expressions that weren't his. A flicker of someone's old contentment, a flash of someone's anxiety, the particular blank of exhaustion so deep it had stopped feeling like anything. He did this sometimes in new places. I had learned to let him finish rather than interrupt. When he came back to himself, he turned his head and looked at me in the chair by the window where I had again not slept and said, "Someone was frightened in this room recently. Not us frightened, hiding frightened." I looked at him. "How recently?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. He sat up slowly. "And Mama, they smelled like nothing." That was the first thing. The second thing was that Ren, eating breakfast, went very still with her spoon halfway to her mouth and said quietly, "Someone just pushed a feeling at me. Through the wall." She set the spoon down and looked at her palm the way she did when she was trying to identify a sensation by its texture. It was like a door handle being tested, feeling for whether it turns. I was on my feet before she finished the sentence. "Which wall?" She pointed at the wall facing the east corridor. "Did you push back?" "No, I just let it bounce." She looked up at me, and for the first time since we had arrived in the palace, her face held something I rarely saw there. Not fear exactly, but its close neighbor. The look of a child who has felt something that reminded her the world was not always safe. "Mama, it felt cold. The feeling was cold, like the person sending it doesn't run warm." I crossed to her immediately and crouched down. "You did exactly right. You don't push back, you don't respond, you let it go. Good girl." I held her face in both hands for a moment. Good girl. That was the second thing. The third thing was that Holman knocked at our door 20 minutes later with a face that had made a decision overnight. He came inside this time without being asked. He sat at the small table and folded his hands on top of it and looked at me with the expression of a man who had rehearsed something and was now setting the rehearsal aside in favor of just saying it. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need to tell the king at the same time, so I'm asking you to come with me now before the morning briefing, before anyone else is in the room." I looked at the twins. They come with me. I expected that. We followed him through the side corridor to the small sitting room adjoining the king's chamber. Kalen was already there, dressed, standing near the fireplace with a cup in his hand, looking like a man who had been awake for some time and was not displeased about it. He looked up when we entered and something in his face settled slightly, the way a room settles when the draft is stopped. He looked at the twins first, then at me, then at Holman. "Sit down, Dave," he said, quietly. The voice of someone who already suspected they were not going to like what came next. Holman sat. We all sat. The fire was going this morning, and its warmth should have made the room feel safer. It didn't. 8 months ago, Holman said, I was approached through a diplomatic back channel by a representative of a man named Davin Wells. The message was framed as a routine inquiry, a private citizen seeking information about the palace's policy on independent practitioners entering the city. He kept his eyes on his folded hands. I responded through the same channel with the standard documentation. I thought nothing more of it. Kalen's cup lowered very slowly to the table. 4 months ago, Holman continued, a second message arrived. This one was less routine. Wells was requesting quiet access to the palace service records, specifically the roster of staff hired in the past 5 years. Holman's jaw tightened. I denied it, but I didn't report it. Why not? Kalen said. His voice had gone the particular flat quiet that I was learning meant the opposite of calm. Because a week later the curse took you. Holman looked up for the first time, and in the chaos of that, in the 43 days of managing everything alone, managing the succession questions and the council and the border disputes and the kingdom not knowing whether its king was dying, I told myself it was a minor inquiry from a minor figure, and I had already handled it by saying no. A pause. I was wrong. And I knew I was wrong approximately 6 weeks ago when I found an unauthorized entry in the service passage logs. Someone had used a staff credential to access the sub-level records vault. The room was very quiet. "Someone is already inside," I said. "Yes," Holman looked at me. "I believe so. I believe they have been for some time. And I believe—" He stopped, steadied. "I believe the curse on the king and Davin Wells are connected. I cannot prove it. But the timing of the access logs and the timing of the curse are not coincidental." Cale, sitting beside me, had both hands flat on the arms of his chair. I could see him reading the residue, the history of everyone who had sat there, the emotional layering of every conversation the chair had witnessed. His face was doing the careful blank thing. Kalen stood. He moved to the window with his back to us and was quiet for a long moment. When he turned back, his face had resolved into something, not rage, which I might have expected, but the cold, focused clarity of a man who had just had a suspicion confirmed and was already 3 steps into the response. "The medallion," he said to Holman. "Tell me about the medallion." Holman frowned slightly. "What medallion?" Kalen looked at Cale. Cale reached into his coat pocket and produced the small carved bone disc, the one he had found in our room yesterday morning, the one Kalen had gone rigid at the sight of. He held it on his open palm. Holman's face changed. "Where did you find that?" he said, very carefully. "In our room," I said. "Someone left it." Holman looked at it for a long moment. "That is a scent stripper's seal. They're used as calling cards among practitioners of that particular discipline. It means the person who left it has been in the room and wants you to know they've been in the room." He looked at me. "It's a message. It means, I know where you are, I can reach you, and I chose to leave this instead of doing something else." "A threat dressed as restraint," Kalen said. "Yes." I looked at the medallion on my son's palm and thought about Ren's face this morning. It felt cold, the person sending it doesn't run warm, and the familiar cold moved through me that I had been living alongside for 6 years, the cold that never fully left, that I had simply learned to function inside. "He's been here a week at least," I said, "possibly longer. He left the medallion to tell me he found us before I found him." I looked at Kalen. "This is what he does. He doesn't move immediately. He positions. He makes sure you know he has the advantage before he exercises it, because the fear is part of what he wants." "You know him well," Kalen said. "Not an accusation, an observation. I spent 2 years thinking I knew him and 6 years learning what I actually knew." I kept my voice level. "He's patient, he's precise, and he will not leave without the twins. He won't reach the twins. You don't know. He won't reach them." Kalen's voice was quiet, but it had something underneath it. Not a promise exactly, more like a fact being stated about the future with the confidence of someone who intended to make it true. He looked at Holman. "I want every service credential issued in the past 3 months audited by tonight. I want the sub-level vault access log pulled and cross-referenced against shift records, and I want it done quietly. No announcements, no palace-wide search. If he knows we're looking, he'll move." Holman nodded and stood immediately. "Dave." Kalen stopped him at the door. His voice shifted, not softer exactly, but less formal. The voice of someone speaking to a person rather than an advisor. "You should have told me about the contact 8 months ago." "Yes," Holman said. "I should have. We'll talk about that later." "Yes." A pause. "I know." He left. The twins were sent back to the East Garden with the same kitchen staff from yesterday, 2 young women named Betsy and Elisa, who had apparently won Ren's complete devotion by knowing a hand-clapping game she had never seen before. I watched them cross the courtyard from the sitting room window and felt the familiar calculus of motherhood running in the back of my mind. exits, distances, response times. And then I turned back to the room and found Kaylin standing closer than I expected. Not close enough to crowd, but close enough that my gift caught his scent before I could pull it back. I let it run for half a second before I stopped it. Half a second was enough. Underneath the wood smoke and the healer's herbs and the clean wool of his clothes, deep, in the place where a person's scent told the truth, regardless of what their face was doing, he carried something vast and still. The quiet of a man who had been alone in a position of responsibility for so long that the loneliness had stopped feeling like loneliness and started feeling like weather. Expected. Unpleasant. Simply the condition of the life. And underneath even that, something I had no name for. Something that my gift registered the way an eye registers a color it hasn't learned the word for yet. Warm and old and very specific. Like a room kept ready for someone who hadn't arrived yet. I pulled my gift back hard. He was watching me. "You just read me," he said, not accusatory, curious. "I didn't mean to." "What did you find?" I looked at him for a moment. "Something I don't have a word for yet." He accepted this without pushing. He moved to the small table and sat, and I sat across from him, and he looked at his hands for a moment before he spoke. "I want to show you something," he said, "but I need to ask you something first." He looked up. "Davin Wells, how long has he had the scent stripping ability?" "As long as I knew him. He was born with it, I think, or trained into it very young." I paused. It's why I trusted him initially. Someone with no scent trail felt neutral, safe. I couldn't read anything threatening in him because I couldn't read anything at all. I held Kaylin's gaze. I was 22 and I had spent my whole life reading danger in people's scent before it arrived. Someone I couldn't read felt like relief. I mistook the absence of information for the absence of threat. "That's not a mistake," he said. "That's a gap in your experience being exploited by someone who understood your gift better than you did." I was quiet for a moment. "You're doing that thing again," I said. "What thing?" "Reframing my history in a way that removes the self-blame from it." "I'm stating what I observe." He held my gaze steadily. "You were hunted by someone who specifically understood your ability and engineered his approach around it. That is not a failure of judgment. That is what it looks like when a predator studies his target before moving." The fire crackled. I looked at my hands. "The archives," I said. "Your grandmother's coded sections. You mentioned a scent key." "Yes. You think I'm the key. I think you might be one of them." He stood and moved to the bookshelf along the inner wall. Not the decorative shelves near the fireplace, but the working shelves, the ones with documents stacked between the books in a way that suggested regular use. He pulled a slim, battered volume from the end of the second shelf and held it out. I took it. The cover was plain, no title. The pages inside were dense with his grandmother's handwriting. I could tell by the consistency of it, the particular slant, and then, 2/3 of the way through, the writing stopped. The remaining pages were blank to the eye, but when I brought the open page close and breathed in, my gift surged so hard I nearly dropped the book. The pages were not blank. They were encoded. Encoded in a sense so old and so layered that reading it fully would take hours. But the top note was immediate and unmistakable, the particular fragrance of a message meant for a specific person, keyed to a specific scent signature. Mine. My exact scent signature, which I had never given to anyone, which could not be duplicated or forged, which was as individual as a fingerprint and twice as impossible to replicate. His grandmother had encoded these pages for me. Before I was born. She knew, I said. My voice came out very quiet. She knew I was coming. "Yes," Kaylin said. "I think she knew a great deal, and I think she left the explanation in those pages." He looked at the book in my hands. "Can you read it?" "Not quickly, and not here." I closed it carefully. "It will take time and privacy, and I need to be sure the twins are safe first. If Davin is in this palace and he knows we're moving against him, he won't wait much longer." "I know." He looked at me steadily, "Which is why I'm going to ask you to trust me with something tonight. Not everything. I'm not asking for everything. One thing." He paused. Let me put guards on the twins' corridor that report only to me. Not Holman, not Pauline, me. I looked at him. The room had his grandmother's book in it. His scent carried something warm and old and specific. Wren had pressed her hand to his chest in the dark and pushed the one feeling she had, and it had reached him. I thought about my mother at the crossroads. I thought about 6 years of exits and suppressant tonic and folding hope into fabric for a man I had never met. "All right," I said. "One thing." He nodded, and I noticed, because I noticed everything, that he let out a breath that had been held for some time. Outside, from the courtyard below, I heard Wren laugh at something, bright and sudden and completely unguarded, the way she laughed when she forgot to be careful. I held on to that sound for a moment. Then I opened the old book again and began to read. Chapter 6. What She Never Said Out Loud. The book took me 4 hours. I sat in the small sitting room with the door locked and the twins asleep in the adjoining room, and the lamp turned up as high as it would go, and I read every encoded page with my gift open fully for the first time in 6 years. Not the careful, controlled trickle I used in daily life, but the whole thing, unguarded, the way my mother had taught me before I learned that an open gift was also an open wound. It was like breathing a life. Iris Reed, Kaylin's grandmother, had been a scent archivist for 50 years. Not a weaver herself, as Holman had said, but something rarer in its own way. A scholar of the gift who had spent half a century documenting bloodlines, abilities, the history of what had been done to scent weavers, and what scent weavers had done in return. She had the kind of mind that held 40 years of information in precise order and could draw a line between a fact from the first decade and a fact from the last with a patience that made the connection look obvious in hindsight. The encoded pages were written to me directly, not to whom it may concern, not to the heir of this bloodline, to me, by name, my real name, the one I had shed at the crossroads in the dark, the one I had not spoken aloud since my mother pressed her forehead to mine for the last time. She wrote, "By the time you read this, you will have spent years believing you were running. I want you to understand that you were also arriving. These two things are not contradictions. They are the same journey described from different ends." I sat with that for a long time before I continued. What she had documented in careful, layered scent script was this. Davin Wells had not found me by accident. He had been directed to my mother's family by a network of collectors, practitioners who hunted gifted bloodlines for what could be extracted and sold. Scent weavers were among the most valuable, because a skilled weaver's encoded memory could be used as evidence, as persuasion, as a key to locked spaces both physical and psychological. The network had been tracking my mother's line for 2 generations. My grandmother before her had been taken. My mother had escaped once, then hidden, then been found again when I was born. Because a newborn scent weaver left a signature in the air that a skilled collector could detect within a radius of 30 miles. Davin had been sent, not stumbled upon us, sent. He had spent 2 years building the relationship deliberately, and the voluntary bonding ritual had been planned from the beginning. Not because he wanted a mate, but because a bonded mate had no legal standing to remove children from a bonded home without the other mate's explicit release. It was a legal trap dressed as a relationship, and it had worked because he had studied my gift and understood that someone who couldn't read him would mistake the silence for safety. Iris had discovered this 8 years ago through her archival network. She had tried to send soldiers. The political complications had been exactly what Holman described. A private citizen in a sovereign territory, no formal complaint lodged, no legal mechanism for intervention without triggering a border incident that would have cost more lives than it saved. So she had done the only thing within her reach. She had commissioned a fate bond encoding and woven it into my bloodline scent, specifically into the base note signature that would be carried by any daughter born to my mother's line. The encoding would do nothing forcible. It would not compel or control. What it would do was ensure that if that daughter ever came within range of the bonded king, the recognition between them would be immediate, mutual, and impossible to fake or override with a false bond. It was designed as a legal shield. if I was ever taken, if Davin or anyone like him attempted to use a forced bond to claim legal rights, the true bond would surface and make the false one unenforceable under Crown law. A fated bond, once manifested and witnessed, superseded all other bonds without exception. No court in the Four Kingdoms could argue against it. She had not told Kaelin. She had written her reason plainly. A king told he has a fated mate will spend his life looking for her and shape his choices around finding her. I did not want that for him. I wanted him to find her freely, or not at all. The encoding ensures recognition. It does not ensure choice. Choice must always remain choice. This was protection for the girl, not a gift for the king, and I made it in that order deliberately. I sat in the lamplight with the book closed in my lap and looked at the far wall for a long time. She had protected me before I existed. She had built a door out of a legal framework and hidden it in my blood and never told either of us. And then she had died 7 years ago and left a coded book that only I could read in a room I wouldn't enter for another 4 years. The patience of it was staggering. And underneath the staggering, like a stone at the bottom of a clear lake, the other thing. The thing I had been sitting next to for 4 hours and not looking at directly. Kaelin had found the book 2 years ago. He had said so himself. I discovered this in the archives 2 years ago. He had known for 2 years that somewhere there was a woman whose bloodline carried his grandmother's encoding. He had not known her name. He had not known her face. But he had known she existed, and he had not told me. I asked Holman to bring him to the sitting room. It was past midnight. The twins were deeply asleep. The palace had gone to its night quiet, that particular stillness of a large building settling into its own bones, and the only sounds were the distant watch change bell and the wind finding the gaps in the old stonework. Kaelin arrived in 3 minutes, which told me he had not been sleeping either. He took one look at my face and the closed book in my lap and sat down without being asked. "You read it," he said. "All of it." A pause. "Then you know." "I know what she did. I know why she did it." I held his gaze across the small table. "I know you found the archive 2 years ago and have known since then that the encoding existed." I kept my voice level, not cold, level. "You knew. Before I arrived here, before the curse, before any of this. I knew a bond had been encoded into a bloodline," he said carefully. "I didn't know which bloodline. I didn't know the woman's name or where she was or whether she was still alive. The archival records my grandmother left me were deliberately incomplete. She coded the identifying information separately, in the section that required the scent key." He held my gaze without flinching. "When I read what I could access 2 years ago, I understood that somewhere there was a woman who carried my grandmother's protection. I had no way to find her. I made a decision not to search for her." "Why?" "Because searching for her would have meant sending people out with orders to find a woman based on her bloodline gift." His voice was very quiet. "That is exactly what Davin Wells did. I was not willing to be a version of that, even with different intentions." The lamp burned between us. I looked at him for a long moment, reading his face the way I read everything, not just the surface but the layers beneath it, the tells that couldn't be coached or controlled. His jaw was set. His hands were still on the table. His scent, which I was trying not to read and was reading anyway through the simple fact of being in a room with him, carried the particular quality of a man saying something true that he has been afraid to say. "She built this to protect me," I said, "not to give you something." "I know." She wrote that explicitly. It was for me first. She was right to write it that way, and she was right that it was in that order. He looked at his hands and then back up at me. "I want to be clear with you about something. The bond, whatever exists between us, whatever she encoded and whatever has developed in the 3 years I was breathing your memory, I am not going to use it as a claim. It is not a claim. It is a fact about our biology that we didn't choose, and biology is not consent." He held my gaze. "I told you I was asking, not ordering. I meant that about every part of this, including this." Something in my chest shifted. I had been braced for argument, for the particular verbal architecture men use to explain why something was actually fine, actually reasonable, actually for your own good. I had learned to recognize it early because I had lived inside it for 2 years with Davin, and by the end, I could smell the structure of it before the first sentence was finished. This was not that. This was a man sitting across a table in the middle of the night and telling me precisely what he knew, precisely when he had known it, and precisely what he intended to do with it, which was nothing without my agreement. "The bond," I said. "Can you feel it?" "Yes," he said, simply. "Since when?" "Since I woke up." A pause. It was the first thing I was aware of. Before my own heartbeat, before the pain, before I knew where I was aware of a thread, something warm and specific and pulling toward a direction. He looked at me steadily. "I didn't know what it was attached to until I smelled the room and understood what you were." I thought about Ren in the corridor, pointing at my chest. The string that goes to him, it's the same color as the ones between me and Kale, the ones that mean you can't actually leave. "I can feel it too," I said. It cost me something to say it. I paid it. I've been trying not to. It felt dangerous to acknowledge. "It is dangerous," he said. "I won't pretend otherwise. Davin is in this palace, and he has legal instruments and a collector's network behind him, and we have—" He stopped, looked at me. "What do we have?" "A fated bond that makes his legal claim void," I said, "if it manifests formally, if it's witnessed." "Yes." "Your grandmother planned for exactly this." "Yes." I looked at the closed book in my lap. 4 hours of a dead woman's careful, patient work. 50 years of an archivist's mind drawing lines between facts across decades. A protection built in the only material she had available, biology and law, and the very specific magic of a gift she didn't possess herself, but understood better than most people who did. "She was remarkable," I said. "She was," Kaylin agreed quietly. "She would have liked you." I looked up. "She encoded specific admiration for the women of your bloodline into her archival notes," he said, "the sections I could read before the coding locked. She called your line the most honest gift in 4 kingdoms because you cannot weaponize a weave. You cannot encode a lie. In a world full of people building weapons from every available material, she found that striking." Something loosened in my chest that had been tight for a very long time. I said, "There is one more thing in the book that I haven't told you yet." He waited. "The network," I said. "The collectors. Davin didn't build it. He works for it. It is older than both of us, and it has people inside courts and councils across the 4 kingdoms." I held his gaze. "Your grandmother spent 20 years documenting it. The names are in the final encoded pages. I read them." I paused. "One of the names is someone currently inside this palace. Not Davin. Someone above Davin." Kaylin went very still. "Who?" he said. I told him. The silence that followed was the longest of the night. Outside, the wind moved through the old stonework and found all the gaps. Chapter 7. The Scent of a Long Lie. I want to say that I saw it clearly the moment I read the name in Iris's archive. I didn't. What I saw was a name I recognized from 3 years of palace life, a name attached to a face I had seen in corridors, in doorways, at the edge of formal gatherings where staff were invisible, and the named people moved through the spaces we had cleaned and prepared. A name so embedded in the ordinary fabric of the palace that reading it in a list of collector network operatives felt less like revelation and more like a wrongness, the particular cognitive lurch of seeing a familiar object in an impossible place. Your coffee cup on the ceiling, your child's shoe in the road. The name was Pauline Little, the head healer, the woman who had taken the king's pulse with trembling fingers the night he stirred, who had managed his care for 43 days with the focused devotion of someone who genuinely did not want him to die, who had looked at my twins with what I had read as professional caution, the wariness of a healer who understood rare gifts and their complications. I had read her scent a dozen times across 3 years of passing in corridors. I had found it complex but not dangerous. Genuine care layered over something older, something I had cataloged as personal grief, the residue that clings to people who have lost something they haven't finished mourning. I had been right about the grief. I had been wrong about what it was grieving. Kalen said nothing for a long time after I told him. Then he said, "How certain is the archive?" "Your grandmother was a scent archivist for 50 years, I said. "The documentation is specific. Dates, transactions, the particular encoded signature she uses to mark confirmed identification." I paused. She was certain. "When was Pauline recruited?" 12 years ago, before you took the throne." He stood and moved to the window with his back to me, and I watched the line of his shoulders in the lamplight and understood that he was doing what people do when something they trusted has to be reclassified entirely, going back through memory and re-examining every moment in its new light, which was necessary and terrible and could not be rushed. "She kept him alive," he said finally, not a question. "Yes, I believe so." I had been thinking about this for the last hour of reading. If Davin's goal was to harvest the twins' abilities, he needed them inside the palace. Inside the palace meant getting me here. Getting me here meant the king had to be alive and conscious, and in a position to request my presence formally. I paused. A dead king is a chaos that doesn't serve the network's purposes. A cursed king who could be managed, kept alive, kept unconscious, kept stable enough to be useful as a mechanism for drawing the right people in, that served them very well. Kalen turned from the window. His face had resolved into the cold, focused clarity I had seen yesterday when Holman made his confession, the face of a man past shock and into response. "She's been managing the curse," he said, "not treating it." "Yes. She could have broken it at any point." "I think so, or at minimum she knew who to contact to break it." I held his gaze. The curse wasn't supposed to break when it did. Ren wasn't part of their plan. A 6-year-old pushing pure feeling through a closed door in the middle of the night, that wasn't something anyone anticipated. I paused. It broke their timeline. He was quiet for a moment. "She'll know her timeline is broken. She's had 2 days to observe us, to watch me wake up, to watch you and the children, to understand that whatever she and Davin planned is not proceeding as intended." He looked at me directly. "She'll move soon." "Yes." "Then we need to move first." He crossed to the door, opened it, and spoke quietly to someone in the corridor. Not a guard, I realized, but a young man I had seen near the king's chambers, who wore no uniform and carried no visible weapon, and had the particular quality of stillness that meant he was very good at what he did. Kalen gave him 3 instructions in a low voice. The man nodded once and was gone. Kalen closed the door and came back to the table. "I've asked Ren to watch Pauline tonight, without her knowledge, and to ensure the twins' corridor has a second set of eyes she won't be aware of." He sat down. "Tomorrow morning I'll confront her. Privately, here, with you present and Holman present. Not because I need witnesses to manage one healer, but because she deserves to have the confrontation done properly, and properly means in a room where everyone understands what is being said." I looked at him. "You're going to give her the chance to explain herself?" "Yes." "She conspired to keep you cursed for 43 days. "Yes." He held my gaze. "And I want to know why. Not for legal purposes. The archive is documentation enough for the courts. But I want to know what a woman who has worked in this palace for 20 years, who I have watched treat patients with genuine skill and genuine care, what that woman was told or given or threatened with that led her here." He paused. "I won't be able to make sense of it without hearing it from her, and I find I need to make sense of it." I thought about what Iris had written, the most honest gift in 4 kingdoms, because you cannot weaponize a weave. I thought about Kalen refusing to search for me because searching would have made him a version of what Davin was. I thought about him sitting across a table at midnight and telling me precisely what he knew, and precisely when he knew it, and precisely what he would not do with it without my agreement. I was recalibrating again. Pauline came at 8 the following morning at Kalen's request. She arrived composed, professional, carrying her medical bag out of habit or performance. I couldn't tell which. She stopped when she saw me sitting in the corner chair, and her composure adjusted slightly, a fractional recalibration of the face, and I read her scent in the 3 seconds before she locked it down. Fear. Underneath that, something that had the particular texture of a grief that had been carried so long it had worn grooves. And underneath even that, buried very deep, almost below the range of my gift, something that might have been relief. The relief of someone approaching the end of a very long pretense. "Your Majesty," she said, "I wasn't aware this was to be a larger meeting." "Sit down, Pauline," Kaelin said. She sat. Holman was there too, standing near the bookshelf with his arms at his sides, his face showing nothing. He had been told an hour ago. He had gone quiet in the way of a man reconfiguring something he thought he understood. Kaelin placed Iris's archive on the table between them. Pauline looked at it. Her face did not change, but her scent shifted, the fear deepening, the buried relief rising slightly, the grief unchanging. "My grandmother documented the collector network for 20 years, Kaelin said. "Your name is in her archive. 12 years of it." He kept his voice level, precise, not cruel. "I want to hear it from you, not because the documentation isn't sufficient, it is, but because you have given 20 years to this palace and to the people in it, and that means something to me, and I would like to understand how those two things exist in the same person." Pauline was quiet for a long moment. Then she put her medical bag down on the floor beside her chair, very carefully, as though setting something down she had been carrying for a long time, and looked at the table. "My daughter," she said. Her voice was even, practiced in the evenness. "She was born with a gift, not scent-weaving, something rarer. The ability to heal at a cellular level. Accelerated tissue regeneration? Transferable. The kind of gift that makes a child a target before she can walk." She paused. "The network found her when she was 4. They offered me a choice. Work with them. Facilitate certain things, manage certain situations, ensure certain outcomes. And my daughter would remain hidden from every collector in the 4 kingdoms under their specific protection. The one thing they could guarantee that I could not provide myself." The room was quiet. "Refuse," she said, "and they would take her." Kaelin said nothing. "I have been buying her safety for 12 years, Pauline said, one compromise at a time, each one smaller than the last one felt, each one made easier by the one before it." She looked up finally, and her eyes were dry in the way of someone who had spent all their tears on this a long time ago. "I did not design the curse. I was given a compound and told to introduce it into the king's evening tea during the winter review. I was told he would sleep, not indefinitely, not permanently. I was told it would last 2 months while a particular arrangement was completed, and then it would be reversed and no lasting harm done." Her jaw tightened. They lied. The curse was not reversible by ordinary means. By the time I understood what I had actually administered, he had been under for 3 weeks, and I had no mechanism to undo it. "So you managed it," Kaelin said quietly. "I kept him stable. I kept him breathing. I kept the pulse strong enough that the succession council didn't formally convene." A pause. "I told myself that was something. It was something," Kaelin said, not warmly, but not without acknowledgement. Pauline looked at him with the expression of a woman who had not expected that. "Where is your daughter now?" Kaelin said. A fractional pause. "A village 2 days east. She's 16. She thinks I'm a healer who works at the capital. She doesn't know any of the rest of it." "She's been safe this whole time? As far as I can verify, yes." Kaelin looked at Holman. Something passed between them, the shorthand of 2 people who had worked together long enough to communicate in fractions. Holman said to Pauline, carefully, "If the king's protection was extended formally to your daughter, documented, legally binding, crown protection rather than the networks, would you be willing to give full testimony? Names, transactions, operational details, everything." Pauline's breath went out slowly. "Yes," she said. "I would give you everything I know." "Then that's what we'll do," Kaelin said. He stood. "You'll remain in the palace under voluntary confinement until the legal process is complete. You'll be treated as a witness, not a prisoner, unless you give me reason to change that categorization." He looked at her steadily. "Your daughter will be brought here today. She'll be safe. That is my word, not the network's. You understand the difference. Pauline pressed her lips together. Yes, she said very quietly. I understand the difference. She was escorted out by Holman. The door closed. I sat in the corner chair and read the air where she had been, the complex layering of her scent, the fear and the grief, and the thing that had been buried relief gradually becoming actual relief, the specific quality of a woman setting down something she had been carrying for 12 years. She was protecting her child, I said. Yes, Kaylin said. She still did what she did. Yes. He looked at me. Both of those things are completely true, and neither one cancels the other. He paused. I know what it looks like when someone makes impossible calculations to protect their children. I watched you do it for 3 days. His voice was very quiet. I'm not able to be unmoved by it, even here. I looked at him. The recalibrating was becoming a more or less permanent state. Outside in the corridor, quick footsteps. And then Ren, the quiet young man from last night, opening the door with the controlled urgency of someone delivering information that could not wait. Your Majesty. He looked between us. The twins. My entire body went cold. They're not in the East Garden, Ren said. They were there 20 minutes ago. Betsy and Elisa turned their backs for under a minute. He held out something small, a length of ribbon, pale blue, Ren's. Found on the path to the service entrance. He paused. And this. He held out a second thing, pressed into a small square of paper in careful, deliberate 6-year-old handwriting, were 3 words. We went first. Chapter 8. 2 6-year-olds walking toward the thing that wants to break them. I was at the door before Ren finished speaking. Kaylin was faster. Not because he was closer, he wasn't, but because he moved with the particular economy of someone who had spent years making rapid decisions in confined spaces, and he was already in the corridor and turning toward the service entrance before I had cleared the doorframe. I caught up in 4 steps, and he didn't tell me to stay back, which I would not have done regardless, and we moved together down the corridor with Ren half a step behind us. How long? I said. 20 minutes at most, Ren said. Betsy raised the alarm the moment she found the ribbon. I came directly. The service entrance leads to the sublevel, Kaylin said. Not a question. Yes. The records vault. Yes. I was already thinking about the medallion on Kale's palm. The calling card left in our room. I know where you are. I can reach you. I chose to leave this instead. Davin did not leave calling cards out of mercy. He left them because the fear they generated was useful to him, because a frightened person made worse decisions, because he had learned 20 years ago that psychological positioning was more reliable than physical force and considerably less legally complicated. He had been positioning for weeks, and my children had walked toward him on purpose. We went first. 6 years old, and they had mapped him, tracked him, and walked toward the thing I had spent their entire lives trying to keep them from, and I did not know whether to be terrified or, underneath the terror, underneath the cold and the shaking I was controlling very hard, devastated with something that felt uncomfortably like pride. The service entrance was a narrow door set into the east wall, used by laundry staff and kitchen deliveries. It opened onto a stone stairwell that descended 2 flights to the sublevel, a series of low-ceilinged corridors housing the palace's older storage, wine cellars, records rooms, the vault where historical documents were kept under lock and accessed only by Holman's direct authorization. The door was unlocked. Kaylin went through first. I was behind him. The stairwell was cold and smelled of old stone and lamp oil, and I caught it immediately, because I had been cataloging it for days. The chemical absence that meant Davin had walked here recently. The particular non-scent of a scent stripper moving through a space, which left its own kind of trail for someone who knew what to look for. Not a smell. A gap. The shape of where a smell should be and wasn't. He had come this way within the hour. I put my hand on Kaylin's arm and he stopped immediately. He came through here, I said quietly, within the hour. Can you tell which direction? I breathed carefully. Reading a scent stripper's trail was like reading a text by the impressions left on the page below. You were working from the negative space, the displaced air, the minute chemical disturbances left by a body moving through a space, regardless of whether that body wanted to leave a trace. Davin was good. He was the best I had encountered, but he had not known about me specifically when he was trained. He had not known that a scent weaver at full open gift could read the shape of an absence the way a sculptor reads the space around a form. "Straight down," I said, "to the vault level." We descended. The records vault was at the end of the lowest corridor, a heavy iron door, old, with a lock that required both a physical key and a practitioner's authorization signature. The door was standing open, not forced, opened with a key. Pauline, I thought. She would have had access, or Davin had taken it from her at some point. Another piece of the arrangement she had been living inside for 12 years. Kaylin stopped at the threshold and held up one hand. From inside the vault, voices. Kale's voice, precise and unhurried. "You planned this for a long time. I can feel it in the floor stones. Years of planning, cold and very controlled." A silence. Then a voice I had not heard in 6 years, and my body remembered it before my mind did. A cold wave moving through me from the sternum outward. The particular physical memory of a sound that had meant danger for 2 years of my life. Davin Wells said, "You're stronger than I expected." He sounded not angry, interested. The tone of a man encountering something he had underestimated and was recalibrating around, which was more dangerous than anger because it meant he was still thinking, still adapting, still moving toward an outcome. "That's good," he said. "That's actually better for what I need." Ren's voice, steady in a way that made my chest ache with how much steadiness it must have cost her. "You're going to try to drain us?" "Yes." "Does it hurt?" A pause, longer than I expected. "I won't lie to you," Davin said. "Yes." Kale said, "Okay." And then, nothing. No sound of struggle, no cry, just Kale's voice, very quiet and very deliberate, saying, "You used to want to be a father. I can feel it in the stones where you're standing. There was a version of you that wanted children the real way, before something broke that." Kaylin's hand found my wrist in the dark of the corridor, not restraining, steadying, because I had made a sound, very small, involuntary, and he had heard it. Inside the vault, complete silence. "You were 8, Kale continued, "when whatever broke it happened. I can feel 8-year-old grief in these stones. It's the oldest thing in the room." A pause. "What happened when you were 8? Davin said nothing. Ren's voice came then, softer than Kale's, more careful, the way she spoke when she was doing the delicate work of her gift rather than just her words. "Your string," she said. "I can see your string. It's the only one I've ever seen that loops back to yourself instead of going outward to someone else. Do you know what that means?" Silence. "It means you're your own prisoner," she said. "You've been inside yourself for a very long time, and you've forgotten there's a door." Something shifted in the air of the corridor. I felt it through my gift, a change in the emotional weather of the space, the way the atmosphere changes before a storm breaks or before it decides not to. Something giving way. Something that had been held rigid for a very long time, encountering a force too specific and too true to resist. Kaylin moved. He went through the door fast, and I was right behind him, and the scene in the vault resolved in an instant. Kale and Ren standing in the center of the room, holding hands, facing a man I had last seen 7 years ago across a dark courtyard with my children strapped to my chest. Davin Wells was tall. He had always been tall, lean in a way that suggested economy rather than scarcity. Dark eyes. A face that had been, when I was 22, the kind of face that looked open and considered. The face I had mistaken for trustworthy because I couldn't read beneath it. He was 6 years older now, and something had changed around his eyes. Not age, something that looked like a very long time of not sleeping easily. He was standing 4 feet from the twins. He had not touched them. His hands were at his sides, and he was staring at my daughter with the expression of a man who had been hit somewhere he had not braced for and could not immediately locate the wound. Kaelin stepped between Davin and the twins in a single movement. Not dramatically, not with announcement. Simply the movement of a body inserting itself into a space and making that space unavailable. I went to the twins. Ren came into my arms immediately. Kael let me pull him close, but kept his eyes on Davin over my shoulder, still reading, still processing, the way he always finished a reading before he let himself feel the aftermath of it. Davin looked at me. 6 years. 6 years of running and hiding and suppressant tonic and checking exits and singing lullabies in rooms I hoped were thick-walled enough to muffle the sound. 6 years of my mother's crossroads face in the back of my mind, and the particular weight of knowing that somewhere behind me there was a man who did not intend to stop. He looked at me the way he always had, assessing, precise, the look of someone calculating rather than feeling. But there was something else in it now, something my gift caught underneath the calculation, something that the children had put there with their specific and devastating accuracy. He looked shaken, not defeated, not remorseful, not yet, not fully, but shaken in the way of a man who has had a door shown to him that he had forgotten existed and is now unable to pretend he can't see it. "Nara," he said. "Don't," I said, quietly, finally. Kaelin looked at Davin with the cold, focused clarity I had come to understand was simply how he inhabited danger. "You are in my palace without authorization, in a restricted area, in proximity to children under crown protection." His voice was even, precise, the voice of a man stating facts before he did anything with them. "You have one opportunity to make the next moments of your life significantly different from what they would otherwise be. I suggest you use it carefully." Davin looked at him. The calculation ran visibly behind his eyes. I had watched it happen 100 times, the rapid assessment of position and leverage and available moves. I watched him inventory the room. One exit, blocked by Kaelin. 2 children standing behind Kaelin. A woman he had spent 6 years hunting, holding those children. A king who had just recovered from a 43-day curse and was clearly not interested in taking time to recover further before dealing with what stood in front of him. I watched him find nothing. For the first time in the years I had known him, Davin Wells found nothing. His hands at his sides were very still. "The boy is right," he said. Not to Kaelin, to Kael, who was still watching him over my shoulder. His voice had changed, the calculation still there, but something else underneath it now, reluctant and raw, like a word said for the first time after years of not saying it. 8 years old. My father gave me to the network at 8, told me it was an apprenticeship. A pause. I've never said that out loud. Kael said nothing. He just looked at him with those serious dark eyes that saw too much. "That does not excuse anything," Davin said, still not to Kaelin, still to my son, as if Kael were the one authority in the room he couldn't argue with. "I know that." "No," Kael said, "it doesn't excuse it." He paused. "But it explains the 8-year-old. The rest of it was yours." Something in Davin's face shifted, a crack in the precision, a fracture in the long-practiced control. Gone quickly, but there. Guards entered behind us. Ren had followed at a distance with 2 of Kaelin's personal detail. Davin looked at them. He looked at Kaelin. He looked, finally, at me. "I'll go quietly," he said. "No legal contest, no network contacts invoked." He held my gaze. "You have my word." "Your word," I said, "is not something I have a use for." "No," he said. "I didn't expect it would be." He looked at the twins one last time, not with ownership, not with the assessing calculation I had dreaded for 6 years, with something I had no word for, something that might, in another life, in another version of 8 years old, have been ordinary. The guards moved forward. Davin went with them without resistance. Afterward, in the corridor outside the vault, Kael sat on the cold stone floor with his back against the wall and his hands in his lap, and did what he always did after a heavy reading, went very still and let it settle. Ren sat beside him with her shoulder against his and her eyes closed. I crouched in front of them. "Are you hurt?" I said, to both of them. "No," Ren said. "Kael." "No," he said. He opened his eyes. We weren't going to let him touch us. We just needed him to stand still long enough for Ren to show him. Show him what? Himself. Ren opened her eyes. The real version, the one from before. She looked at me with those clear amber eyes. Mama, I've never shown anyone something that old before. I had to go very deep. She paused. It tired me. I know, baby. Was it wrong? To show him? I looked at my daughter. No, I said. It wasn't wrong. He cried, Kale said quietly. When I said the 8-year-old part, he didn't show it on his face, but I could feel it in the floor. The stones were very warm for a moment. He looked at his hands. I didn't know grief could make stones warm. Kalen crouched beside me. He looked at Kale, then at Ren, with an expression I felt through my gift without trying to. The particular warmth of a person encountering bravery in an unexpected form and being moved by it in a way that ran deeper than admiration. You did something very difficult, he said to them, and you did it with more skill and more wisdom than most adults manage in a lifetime. Ren considered this. We practiced, she said. Kalen looked at me. I looked back at him. In the corridor's cold lamplight, with my children sitting against the wall and Davin Wells somewhere above us in the custody of the Crown, and everything that had been held in suspension for 6 years finally, slowly beginning to resolve, I let myself read his scent fully for one unguarded moment. The forest after rain, the vast stillness, the room kept ready, and underneath all of it, new and warm and entirely unmistakable. Relief. The specific relief of someone who had been afraid of something they hadn't admitted being afraid of, and the thing had not come to pass. He had been afraid for my children. Not as an abstraction, not as an obligation, as a person who had already, without announcement or ceremony, started to love them. I pulled my gift back. I looked at the cold stone floor. Mama, Ren said, your face is doing the thing. What thing? I said. The thing where you feel something and you don't want to yet. She leaned her head against my arm. It's okay, Mama. You can feel it. We're safe now. I held my daughter and did not say anything, but she was right. We were. Chapter 9. The scent she was born carrying. He told me 3 days later. Not that night. That night was for the twins recovering, for Pauline's formal testimony beginning, for Holman managing the legal machinery of Davin's confinement with the meticulous thoroughness of a man who understood that the difference between justice and chaos was paperwork done correctly. That night was for Kalen, sitting with his advisors until past midnight, and for me, sitting with my children until they slept, and then sitting awake beside them because some part of my body did not yet believe that sitting awake beside sleeping children was no longer necessary. The days that followed had a particular quality I had no prior experience of, the quality of aftermath. The specific texture of time after the thing you have been bracing against has finally happened, and the bracing is no longer required, and your body does not know what to do with the energy it was holding. I washed linens. I know how that sounds. But the palace still needed its laundry done, and I was still technically employed as a laundress. And the rhythm of it, the pressing and folding, the warm smell of clean fabric, the particular meditative quality of work that required the hands and left the mind free, was the thing I knew how to do when I didn't know what else to do with myself. Kalen found me in the linen room on the second afternoon. He stood in the doorway for a moment before I acknowledged him. I had heard him coming. His footsteps had a particular pattern I had cataloged without meaning to over the past week, the slightly uneven weight distribution of someone still rebuilding strength after 43 days of lying still. He was improving daily. By the end of the week, he would be fully even. I had noticed this the way I noticed everything, involuntarily, and I had also noticed that I had noticed it and had filed that observation under recalibrating and moved on. You're working, he said. The sheets don't fold themselves. He came inside. He leaned against the work table across from me with his arms loosely crossed and watched me press a pillowcase flat and said, I need to tell you something. I set the iron down. All right, I said. He looked at the window above the work table, the small rectangle of gray afternoon sky, and then back at me. I recognized the expression. I had seen it in the sitting room at midnight when he told me about the archive, when he had set the rehearsed version aside and simply said the thing. 2 years ago, he said, when I found the coded sections of my grandmother's archive and read what I could access, the sections that didn't require the scent key, I learned that she had commissioned a fate bond encoding. I told you this. Yes? What I didn't tell you is everything I understood from those sections. He held my gaze. I knew it was a protection. I knew it was encoded into a specific bloodline. I knew that the woman who carried it would be a scent weaver. He paused. And I knew one more thing. The accessible sections included my grandmother's reasoning for choosing a fate bond specifically rather than another form of legal protection. She wrote that a fate bond would only be useful if it was real, if the king who carried the other end of it was genuinely capable of the bond. If he wasn't, the encoding would remain dormant and provide no protection at all. I was very still. She tested you, I said, before she encoded it. Yes. He looked at his hands. She spent 6 months before her death assessing whether I was capable of a genuine fated bond, not whether I deserved one, not whether I wanted one, but whether the biological and emotional architecture was there, whether I was the kind of person the bond could take root in. He looked up. She concluded that I was. She wrote her reasoning in detail, and reading it 2 years ago, I understood that she had been. She had been looking at me very carefully for a very long time without my knowing she was doing it. What did she find? I said, quietly. Someone who had been alone in a very specific way for a very long time, he said. Someone who had closed off a particular kind of hoping without realizing he'd done it. She wrote... He stopped. She wrote that I had the capacity for the bond, but that it had been... She used the word banked. The way you bank a fire when you're not using it. Still there, considerably reduced. A pause. She said the right person would unbank it without trying, that it would simply happen in the natural course of being near her. The linen room was very quiet. Outside the small window, the afternoon was gray and still, and somewhere in the east garden I could hear Wren's voice rising in the particular pitch that meant she was in the middle of explaining something she found extremely important to someone who was not keeping up. The bond I've been feeling, I said, since you woke, since... I stopped. Since before you woke, if I'm honest, I've been feeling something for longer than I've admitted. I know, he said. I could feel you trying not to. I looked at him. It has a particular quality, he said, almost apologetic. The bond, when one person is pulling away from it, like a current running against resistance. You can feel both the pull and the pulling back simultaneously. That must have been annoying. It was informative. A faint version of the not quite smile. I understood you weren't ready. I wasn't going to push. I picked up the pillowcase I had set down and pressed it flat again, more for something to do with my hands than because it needed further pressing. He waited. He was very good at waiting, I had noticed. The patience of someone who had learned that most things worth having required time, and that time spent waiting was not time wasted. Tell me the rest of it, I said. The thing you haven't said yet. He was quiet for a moment. My grandmother encoded the bond into your bloodline scent, he said carefully. What I didn't fully understand until I read the sections you unlocked, the sections requiring your scent key, was the mechanism she used. He paused. She didn't create the bond, Nara. She couldn't. A fated bond cannot be manufactured from nothing. What she did was identify a bond that already existed in potential, in the particular compatibility between my emotional architecture and the bloodline she was protecting, and she encoded a recognition signal into the base note of your scent. He held my gaze. The bond was already there, in the way that certain things are already true before anyone says them out loud. She didn't build it. She made sure we would recognize it when we encountered each other. I set the iron down again. The difference matters, he said. I need you to understand the difference. She didn't make you for me. She didn't shape you toward me or draw you to this place. She found something that existed in potential between two people who had never met, and she encoded a signal that would make the recognition immediate rather than gradual or missed entirely or arrived at too late. He paused. The bond is real. It was always going to be real if we ever encountered each other. She simply ensured we would know it when it happened, rather than spend years in each other's orbit being confused by something neither of us had words for. The afternoon light was thin and gray through the small window. I thought about Iris Reed, 50 years of careful scholarship, 40 years of documenting a network that hunted people like me, 6 months of watching her grandson without his knowledge to understand what he was capable of, and then one final act before she died, building a door out of biology and law and the particular magic of a gift she didn't possess, and hiding it in a scent that hadn't been born yet for a woman she would never meet. The patience of it, the love of it. She never told you, I said. No. She protected a woman she'd never meet and built a shield into her bloodline and never told the other person involved because she didn't want it to change how you moved through the world. I looked at him. She was protecting both of us. Yes, he said quietly. I think that's exactly right. I was quiet for a moment. You should have told me sooner, I said, when you understood what the bond was, before we were sitting in a midnight room and the situation was already pressing on both of us. I kept my voice even. I had a right to the information before it had stakes. Yes, he said. No argument, no explanation offered as mitigation, just direct acknowledgement, clean as a struck bell. You did. I was trying to find the right moment and there was always something more urgent, and I used the urgency as a reason to delay, which was not courageous of me. He held my gaze. I'm sorry. I looked at him. In 6 years of running, I had heard a great many things from a great many people. I had heard justifications and deflections and explanations that were apologies wearing a different coat. I had heard genuine sorrow that was still primarily concerned with its own discomfort. I had developed a finely calibrated sense for the difference. This was the uncomplicated version, the kind that didn't need anything back. All right, I said. He nodded once. We were quiet for a moment, the linen room around us, the gray afternoon outside the window, the distant sound of Wren still explaining something urgently in the garden. The bond, I said. If I choose to keep it, to not pull against it anymore. I paused. What does that mean practically, for the children, for everything? Formally, he considered, a witnessed acknowledgement between the two parties is sufficient to make it legally binding. No ceremony required, though ceremony is available if wanted. The bond's legal effect is immediate upon acknowledgement. Davin's claim, which he has already voluntarily relinquished, would have no mechanism of revival. The children would be under permanent crown protection. He paused. Those are the legal implications. And the other implications. He looked at me for a long moment. I would like to know you, he said simply. Not what the linens told me, not what the bond tells me. I would like to know you the ordinary way, slowly and in the light, and with your full knowledge of what I know and don't know. He paused. I would like the twins to grow up somewhere they don't have to be quiet about what they are. I would like Cale to read whatever he wants to read without hiding, and Wren to push feeling at things without apologizing for it. A beat. I would like to find out what you're like when you're not checking the exits. My hands were still on the pressed pillowcase. I thought about 6 years of suppressant tonic and exits, and the particular cold that was not cold exactly, but the absence of warmth, the absence of the ordinary good things that I had stopped thinking of as possible because thinking of them as possible made their absence worse. I thought about Wren in the corridor outside the vault. It's okay, Mama. You can feel it. We're safe now. I thought about Iris Reed building a door in the dark for a woman who wasn't born yet. I said, ask me tomorrow. He looked at me, searching for something in my face, and whatever he found there, not a no, not a flinch, but something more complicated and more honest than either of those, he accepted it without pressure. All right, he said. He left. I stood in the linen room with the pressed pillowcase in my hands and read the air where he had been, the forest after rain, the vast, still warmth, the room kept ready, and underneath all of it, new and unmistakable and growing steadily despite everything I had done to slow it down. The particular scent of a bond that had been waiting for years to be acknowledged. Warm, patient, utterly certain of itself. I set the pillowcase down. I went to find my children. Wren was in the east garden explaining to a very patient young guard named Sam exactly why the arrangement of the garden's flowering shrubs was creating an emotional confusion in anyone who walked the central path, and what could be done to fix it. Sam was listening with the expression of a man who had not expected his afternoon shift to involve landscape consultation, but was genuinely uncertain how to redirect the conversation. Cale was sitting on the garden wall with a book open in his lap and his hands flat on the stone on either side of him, reading the emotional residue of everyone who had ever sat there. He looked up when I sat beside him. "You talked to him," he said. "Yes. Did he tell you?" I looked at my son. "What do you know?" "I read the sitting room floor 3 days ago." He turned a page without looking at it. "I know what was decided there a long time before we arrived. I know there's something in this palace that's been waiting." He paused. "It smells like you, Mama. The old thing in the floor. It smells like the lullaby." I looked at the garden. "Yes," I said, "it does." "Are you going to keep it?" I thought about the answer I had given Kaylin an hour ago. Ask me tomorrow. Not a no, not a yes. The answer of someone who needed to make the choice in their own time, in their own way, without the weight of the situation pressing on it. "Yes," I said, to Cale, because Cale was not the situation. Cale was my son, who had read the floor and already knew, and who deserved the honest answer. He nodded. He turned another page. "Good," he said. "His emotional residue is the warmest I've ever felt from an adult. Most adults feel complicated." He considered this. "He feels complicated too, but warm underneath, like a fire that's been banked a long time." I looked at my son. "Your great-grandmother would have liked you," I said. He looked up. "Whose great-grandmother?" I looked at the garden where Wren was now drawing a diagram in the dirt with a stick to illustrate her point about the shrubs, and the patient guard Sam was crouching down to look at it with what appeared to be genuine interest. "I'll explain tomorrow," I said. Cale accepted this with the equanimity of a child who had learned that some answers arrived in their own time. He went back to his book. I sat on the wall beside him in the gray afternoon and let the garden settle around us, and did not check the exits. Chapter 10. She chose it. Nobody made her. She chose it. I went to him the next morning, not because the morning felt significant or because I had planned it that way. I had learned a long time ago that the moments that changed things rarely announced themselves in advance. They arrived in ordinary light, in ordinary clothes, while the rest of the world was doing ordinary things, and the only ceremony they required was showing up. Kaylin was in the small study 2 doors from his chamber. I knew because Wren had mentioned it in passing while bringing the twins their breakfast, with the careful casualness of someone who had been asked to mention it in passing and was performing the casualness with more visible effort than he realized. I had not said anything about this to Wren. I had simply finished my tea and told the twins I would be back in an hour. Wren said, "Take longer if you need to." Cale didn't look up from his book. The study door was open. Kaylin was at the desk with correspondence spread in front of him, the particular depth of the pile suggesting that 43 days of unconsciousness had left a considerable administrative aftermath. He looked up when I appeared in the doorway. He went very still in the way he did when something mattered, and he was trying not to make it obvious that it mattered. I came inside. I did not sit in the chair farthest from him. I stood in front of his desk and I opened my gift fully. Not a trickle, not a careful, controlled read, but all of it, the way I had in my mother's kitchen as a child, before I learned that an open gift needed tending, before I learned that reading everything in a room was beautiful and overwhelming in equal measure. I read him, all of him, the forest after rain, the vast, patient stillness, the long loneliness that had stopped registering as loneliness and become simply the weather of his life. Underneath that, the thing his grandmother had called banked, The particular warmth of a capacity that had been carefully reduced and carefully maintained in its reduced state, neither extinguished nor permitted to grow, simply held. And underneath even that, new and warm and running like a current through everything else, the bond. Not the encoded recognition signal. That had done its work and was simply part of the air now. What I was reading was the thing the signal had confirmed. Old and specific and utterly patient, the way deep water is patient, the way something that has been true for a long time is patient because it has no need to hurry. I read all of it. I stood in the gray morning light of the small study, and I let myself feel it without pulling back, without recalibrating, without filing it under something manageable. I felt it the way I had not let myself feel anything in 6 years, fully and with both hands. Then I said, "You smell like the lullaby." He looked at me. "I encoded it when the twins were 3 days old," I said. "I didn't know if we were going to survive the first winter. I pressed every good thing I could imagine their life becoming into a fragrance, and I released it in the room while they slept. Everything I hoped for them. Everything I wanted the world to be capable of being." I held his gaze. "You smell like that. The whole thing. Every note of it." Something moved across his face, the full version of the expression that usually only made it halfway before he recalled it. "That's the most extraordinary thing anyone has ever said to me," he said quietly. "It's the truest thing I know how to say." I looked at him steadily. "I'm not choosing the bond because it's practical. I'm not choosing it because Davin's claim needs voiding or because your grandmother built a door and I'm walking through it because it's there." I paused. "I'm choosing it because you told me what you knew and when you knew it, and what you refused to do with it, because you heard my history and called it strategy instead of failure, because you gave a woman you barely knew a reason to trust something she had stopped believing was possible." I paused. "And because my son says your emotional residue is the warmest he's ever felt from an adult, and Cale is not generous with assessments." Kalen stood. He came around the desk slowly, the way he moved when he was being careful. Not careful of me, I understood now, but careful with the moment, the way you are careful with something you do not want to damage by moving too fast. He stopped within reach. "I want to ask you something," he said, "before anything else." "All right. Is there anything you need from me? Any specific thing? Before you're ready to do this? Not the legal acknowledgement. Before that. Anything I haven't said or done or—" "No," I said. "You've been surprisingly thorough." The not-quite smile reached his eyes this time, fully for once. "Then I'd like to ask," he said, "whether I can—" "Yes," I said. He reached out and his hands came up to frame my face, both of them, his thumbs at my cheekbones, and the contact sent something through me that I had no name for, a warmth that started at the point of touch and moved outward through my entire body, like the feeling of stepping into a lit room after a very long time in the cold. He read my face the way I read scent, carefully, thoroughly, without rushing. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi," I said. He kissed me. Not tentative, not careful in the sense of held back, careful in the sense of deliberate, of chosen, of a man who understood what he was doing and intended every part of it. Warm and slow and entirely present, and I felt the bond surge between us like something that had been waiting for exactly this to settle into its final shape, and I stopped thinking about exits and residue and anything at all, and kissed him back with the full force of 6 years of hoping I had been encoding into his bedsheets without knowing who was breathing it. When we separated, he kept his hands at my face and looked at me and said nothing for a moment. There was nothing that needed saying. The bond had said it, not in words, not in anything communicable in ordinary language, but in the particular language of two people whose biology had just confirmed what their history had been building toward. "The legal acknowledgement," I said eventually. "Holman can arrange it this afternoon." His thumbs were still moving slowly at my cheekbones. "Witnessed, formally documented, Pauline's testimony alongside it for the network records." A pause. "Davin's voluntary relinquishment is already filed." "Good," I paused. "He should be told. About Pauline's daughter. About the Crown protection." I held his gaze. He gave the twins up without a fight. Whatever else he is, he made a choice in that vault, and I think he should know that choices still count. That one still counted. Kaylin looked at me for a moment. "I'll send word this afternoon," he said quietly. I nodded. I stepped back, not far, just enough to breathe without reading him involuntarily with every breath, which was a skill I suspected would take considerable practice in the coming years. "One more thing," I said. "Yes?" "The twins. When the legal acknowledgement is done, what they are, what they can do, I don't want it hidden anymore." I held his gaze. "No more suppressant tonic. No more teaching them to be quiet about it. No more—" My voice went slightly unsteady for one word, and I steadied it. "No more making them small so we can survive." "No," he said, "never again." Said the way he said things that were not promises, but facts about the future he intended to make true. They are extraordinary. They should know that every day, without qualification. I looked at him. "Your grandmother would have liked you," I said. "I hope so." He paused. "I think she liked you more." The legal acknowledgement was held that afternoon in the same small sitting room where everything had begun. Holman present, Wren present, 2 Crown witnesses whose names I would learn properly over the following weeks. The twins sat on the window seat. Wren had her feet dangling and was watching the proceedings with the focused attention she gave to things she considered important. Cale had brought his book and was pretending to read it while actually watching everything over the top of the page. It was not a ceremony. It was a statement, made by both of us in turn, witnessed and documented. When it was done, Holman shook Kaylin's hand and turned to me with the warm, overcomplicated scent I had been reading for a week, and I understood finally what the low, unresolved note was. It was the scent of a man who had been carrying a secret he hadn't told, and had been carrying guilt about it, and was now, with the situation resolved, beginning the slow process of setting the guilt down. He had known, I thought, not the full picture, not Iris's encoding, not the bloodline connection, but he had known more than he had said, about the network, about the risk to my children, possibly about the nature of what Davin was when he first made contact. He had managed it rather than disclosed it, and it had cost him something, and he knew it had, and he was going to have to live with that. I did not say any of this to him. Some things people had to arrive at themselves. Wren slid off the window seat and came to stand in front of Kaylin with great seriousness. "Your string changed color," she announced. He crouched down to her level. "What color is it now?" She considered him carefully. "Before, it was the color of sky before it rains. Something about to happen that's been building a long time." She tilted her head. "Now it's the color of sky after, when the light comes through." "Is that better?" "It's different," she said. "Better is for things that were bad before. This was never bad. It just wasn't finished yet." She turned and ran back to Cale on the window seat. "I told you," she said to him. "I know," he said, turning a page. 3 weeks later, Pauline's daughter arrived at the palace. Her name was Addie, short for something longer that she had shed at some point in the independent way of 16-year-olds, and she was tall and dark-eyed and looked at everything with the focused wariness of someone who had grown up knowing she was being protected from something without knowing precisely what. She and her mother sat in a small room for 2 hours with the door closed, and I did not read anything that came from under the door because some things were not mine. When the door opened, Pauline's face was the face of someone who had set down a weight and was still adjusting to the absence of it. Unsteady, raw, slowly filling with something that had been displaced for 12 years. Addie looked at me in the corridor with her mother's precise, assessing eyes and said, "You're the scent weaver." "Yes." "Mum said you read the archive." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "She said you could have used it against her, the documentation. You could have had her. You had grounds." "I know," I said. "Why didn't you?" I thought about Pauline setting her medical bag on the floor beside the chair with the careful movement of someone setting down something they'd carried too long. I thought about Kaylin saying, "I know what it looks like when someone makes impossible calculations to protect their children." "Because I understand the calculation," I said. "That doesn't mean the things she did didn't happen." They did, but I understand why she made them, and that matters to me. Addie looked at me for a long moment with those precise eyes. Okay, she said, simply. The way young people accepted complex things when they were given them honestly. She went back inside to her mother. 6 weeks after that, on a morning in early spring, when the East Garden was beginning to consider waking up, and Wren had appointed herself personally responsible for its progress, and was spending 40 minutes each morning doing something she described as emotional encouragement to the earliest flowers, I sat on the garden wall with Kaylin while the twins moved through the garden below us. Wren was crouched near the first low row of green, both hands pressed flat to the soil, pushing feeling into the ground with the focused intensity she brought to everything she cared about. Kale was sitting cross-legged 3 feet away, reading a book about the history of scent weaving in the northern provinces that Kaylin had sourced from the archive and presented to him with the gravity appropriate to giving a 6-year-old the history of himself. Kale had read it twice already. The morning was pale and clean. The garden smelled of thawing earth and cold stone warming slowly, and somewhere underneath it all, the particular green smell of things beginning. Kaylin's arm was around my shoulders. I had not checked the exits when I came into the garden. I was aware that I had not. It sat in my mind not as an absence of vigilance, but as its own specific feeling. The feeling of a habit set down because it was no longer the primary tool for surviving the day. Like taking off armor you'd worn so long you'd forgotten what your own weight felt like without it. It felt like breathing differently. It felt like being inside the lullaby instead of encoding it. "What are you thinking?" Kaylin said. "That I forgot to check the exits." He was quiet for a moment. "Is that—" "Good," I said. "It's good." I leaned into him slightly. "I'll probably still do it sometimes. Old habits." I paused. "But today I forgot, and the forgetting felt like something." "What did it feel like?" I thought about Iris Reed building a door in the dark, about a woman I had never met deciding that a girl not yet born deserved to be safe, about scent encoded into fabric and breathed by a dying man for 3 years, and a 6-year-old girl pressing her hand to a stranger's chest in the dark and pushing the one true thing she had into the silence. About Kale reading stones and finding warmth in grief. About Wren showing a man his own abandoned childhood and watching something crack in him that had been solid and cold for 30 years. About a bond that had been true before either of us had words for it, patiently waiting in the bass note of a scent to be recognized. "It felt like the lullaby," I said. "The thing I was hoping for when I encoded it. The thing I didn't have a name for yet. Just a feeling of what I wanted for them. What I wanted the world to be capable of being." I looked at the garden, at my children moving through the early spring light. It felt like that. His arm tightened slightly around my shoulders. Below us, Wren sat back on her heels and examined the row of green shoots with the satisfaction of a job completed. "They're listening," she announced to no one in particular. "Plants don't have feelings, Wren," Kale said without looking up from his book. "Everything has feelings, Kale. You just have to know how to push." She stood and brushed soil from her knees. "I've been telling you this for years." "You've been telling me everything for years. That doesn't make all of it, it makes most of it right." "Most of it." "Most is very good." Kale turned a page. "It's acceptable." Kaylin looked down at them, and his face did the full version of the thing it usually only did halfway. The warmth of it was something I felt through the bond, and through my open gift, and through the simple, ordinary fact of sitting beside someone and feeling them be happy. I turned and kissed him once, briefly, in the morning light. He looked at me the way he had looked at me across the chaos of the healer-flooded room 11 days ago, when he had been 43 days unconscious and barely able to speak, with the particular expression of a man who has solved the question that was killing him. Below us, Wren said to Kale without turning around. "Told you." Kale said, "You tell me everything. And I'm right about most of it." A pause. "Yes," he said quietly, turning the last page of his book. "You are." Later, in the records vault that had been cleaned and relit and repurposed as additional archive space, Iris Reed's encoded book was given a permanent place on the highest shelf. Nobody had suggested it. Kaylin had simply put it there one afternoon, and Holman had seen him do it and said nothing, and I had come in an hour later and seen it sitting on the highest shelf, where it caught the lamplight from below and smelled, faintly, of everything she had ever hoped for both of us. I left it there. Some doors, once opened, didn't need to be closed again. They just needed to be walked through.